What if the chaos shaking our world, from breaking news to border standoffs, is not chaos at all, but a meticulously orchestrated strategy unfolding in plain sight? Consider the possibility. The turbulence we see today in places as far-flung as Moldova, Venezuela, and the South Caucasus may not be a random collection of crises, but instead interconnected moves on a global chessboard. Each region, currently simmering under the spotlight of international attention, tells a story that, when woven together, reveals a far larger contest for influence and resources than most people realize. At first glance, these hotspots appear disconnected. In Moldova, NATO's presence quietly grows, while the headlines focus on a nation struggling with its identity. Thousands of miles away, American bomber flights edge closer to Venezuela's shores, raising regional anxiety. Meanwhile, in the South Caucasus, new trade corridors are being mapped out, with Washington's influence often disguised beneath the veneer of economic development. If we connect these seemingly isolated events, a pattern begins to emerge, a deliberate web of confrontation, escalation, and shifting power balances. This is not just about diplomats and generals maneuvering on the world stage. The consequences of these strategies reach far beyond conference rooms and war rooms. They threaten to profoundly disrupt the lives of ordinary people. Imagine waking up to find your city suddenly a frontline, or your economic future dictated by distant negotiations. In the 20th century, such scenarios seemed the stuff of Cold War thrillers. Today, they are closer to reality than ever. To truly understand what is unfolding, it is essential to see through the fog of propaganda and surface-level reporting. Relying solely on official narratives risks missing the underlying forces at play. In the information age, where media spin and selective facts dominate news cycles, critical thinking is not just a virtue. It is a necessity for anyone seeking to grasp the real stakes behind world events. So, what deeper forces are propelling these flashpoints into global headlines? Let us begin in Moldova. For decades, this small Eastern European nation was the very definition of neutrality. Bordered by Romania and Ukraine, Moldova managed to avoid the violent upheavals that scarred its neighbors. Its constitution enshrined neutrality as a guiding principle, and for many Moldovans, this was a source of pride. The country's leaders positioned Moldova as a bridge between East and West, a buffer zone where competing interests could meet without clashing. However, in recent years, the winds have shifted. With mounting pressure from Berlin and Washington, Moldova is rapidly shedding its non-aligned posture and steering decisively toward the Euro-Atlantic camp. This is not mere rhetoric. Following closely contested parliamentary elections, the pro-European party clinched victory by a razor-thin margin, thanks largely to votes from the Moldovan diaspora scattered across Western capitals. This result, while celebrated by some, has inflamed tensions at home. Opposition parties accuse the government of sidelining the voices of those who remain in Moldova. Protests have erupted in Chisinau, with citizens decrying what they see as a rigged process and the marginalization of their concerns. Such discontent is not unique to Moldova. Similar dynamics have played out elsewhere. Consider the color revolutions in Georgia and Ukraine, where diaspora votes and international support tipped the scales, triggering street protests, accusations of manipulation, and, ultimately, sweeping political changes. In Moldova, the sense of betrayal among the opposition is palpable, fracturing what little social cohesion the country possessed. The government's new course is being implemented at lightning speed. Military reforms are underway, aiming to expand Moldova's modest armed forces by nearly 1/3 and to raise defense spending to 1% of the country's gross domestic product. German and American advisors are embedded at every level, rewriting military standards to conform with NATO guidelines. Infrastructural upgrades, especially to railways and roads, are proceeding at a breakneck pace, designed to ensure that Western troops and equipment can be moved swiftly in the event of a crisis. The government has made its position clear. Russia is now officially designated as Moldova's principal security threat. This aggressive pivot stirs ghosts from the past. The breakaway region of Transnistria, nestled along Moldova's eastern border, remains a powder keg. Guarded by Russian peacekeepers and housing one of the largest Soviet-era munitions depots in Europe, the region is a constant reminder of unresolved conflicts. The parallels with other frozen conflicts, such as Abkhazia and South Ossetia in Georgia or Donbas in Ukraine, are unmistakable. In each case, attempts to shift geopolitical allegiances have triggered unrest, military standoffs, and, in some instances, open warfare. Within Moldova, the opposition warns that the country risks becoming expendable, a pawn in a much larger geopolitical contest. They point to the lessons of Ukraine, where the pursuit of Euro-Atlantic integration triggered a chain reaction of events, including the annexation of Crimea, war in the Donbas, and a humanitarian crisis that has lasted for years. Moldovans fear that their sovereignty and stability could be sacrificed in pursuit of someone else's grand strategy. This is not mere speculation. Historical precedent abounds. During the Cold War, small states in Europe, such as Finland, Austria, and Yugoslavia, walked a delicate tightrope, balancing between East and West to preserve their independence. When that balance was upset, as in the case of Yugoslavia in the 1990s, the result was devastating. A decade of war, economic collapse, and the disintegration of the state. The stakes, therefore, are immense. Moldova stands on the verge of losing what little agency it possesses, its fate increasingly determined by decisions made in foreign capitals. As Western and Russian ambitions collide, the danger of Moldova becoming the next battleground in a revived Cold War grows with each passing day. But Moldova is only one piece on the board. As tension mounts across Europe, another front is quietly emerging far to the west, one that could intersect with the European crisis in unexpected and profound ways. Let us turn our attention to Venezuela, an oil-rich nation whose political turmoil and economic collapse have become regular fixtures in global headlines. Yet beneath the familiar narratives of democracy, dictatorship, and drug trafficking lies a deeper, less discussed driver: control over the world's largest proven oil reserves. Over recent months, United States strategic bombers have circled the Caribbean skies, an unmistakable show of force. The Central Intelligence Agency, now operating with explicit presidential approval, has been authorized to conduct covert actions against the government in Caracas. Officially, Washington's position is principled: defending democracy, combating narco-trafficking, and upholding human rights. Yet, as history repeatedly shows, realpolitik often trumps idealism. Consider the example of Iran in the 1950s, when the Central Intelligence Agency and British intelligence orchestrated the overthrow of Prime Minister Mohammad Mossadegh, not for ideological reasons, but to protect Western oil interests. Or think of Iraq in the early 21st century, where the stated goal of liberating a nation was quickly overshadowed by the scramble for post-war oil contracts. In Venezuela's case, American refineries have for decades depended on the country's uniquely heavy crude oil. This unspoken dependency has quietly powered key sectors of the United States economy, from transportation to petrochemicals. However, sanctions and global oil shortages now threaten to choke off these vital lifelines, rattling industries and raising the stakes far beyond politics. Inside Venezuela, President Nicolas Maduro's government is bracing for escalation. Official speeches vow resistance, but the regime is acutely aware of its vulnerability. Without the support of allies such as Iran, Cuba, and China, both material aid and international legitimacy would quickly evaporate. The regime leans heavily on these foreign partners and on the last remnants of popular support, even as living standards plummet and protests simmer. If this fragile balance snaps, the result could be chaos on a scale not seen since the end of the Cold War. For the United States, the path forward is fraught with peril. Unlike previous interventions in Latin America, there is no reliable local proxy to absorb the brunt of conflict. Any direct military intervention risks devolving into a drawn-out quagmire, reminiscent of Vietnam or Iraq, sapping American willpower, resources, and international credibility. Domestic backlash is a near certainty, especially if the operation ignites instability across the region or exposes American interests to reprisal. A full-scale invasion is improbable. Instead, what is far more likely is a sustained campaign of pressure, sabotage, economic sanctions, cyber operations, and psychological warfare, all designed to weaken the Maduro regime from within. However, each escalation carries new dangers. Regional destabilization, economic shockwaves, and the specter of a conflict spilling into neighboring countries loom large. Consider the waves of refugees that have already fled Venezuela, over 5 million people, according to United Nations estimates, straining the social fabric of Colombia, Brazil, and other neighbors. As Latin America teeters on the edge, the world's gaze shifts eastward, to the South Caucasus, where a fresh contest for power and resources is quietly brewing, and American influence is once again in play. The South Caucasus region, encompassing Armenia, Azerbaijan, and Georgia, has long been a crossroads of empires. From the ancient Silk Road to the imperial rivalries of the 19th and 20th centuries, control over these lands has meant access to lucrative trade routes, energy corridors, and strategic military positions. Today, a new chapter is unfolding, one that echoes the great power struggles of the past. Consider the much-touted transit corridor linking Azerbaijan and Armenia. Officially, it promises peace, prosperity, and regional cooperation, a gateway for trade, a bridge for reconciliation. Yet, look beyond the official pronouncements, and the reality is more complex. There are, as yet, no fully operational roads or railways. Border posts remain shuttered, and each supposed benefit is either delayed or tied to future political concessions. This is not simply a matter of two neighbors shaking hands. Azerbaijan has maneuvered itself into the role of regional gatekeeper, carving out a direct land bridge to Turkey while bypassing both Russia and Iran. This bold move shifts Azerbaijan's role from a crossroads to a power broker, giving it unprecedented leverage over its neighbors and outside powers alike. For Armenia, the stakes are equally high. The corridor offers the tantalizing prospect of escape from years of isolation and economic blockade. However, the price is steep. Yerevan faces intense pressure to rewrite its constitution, make painful political concessions, and accept foreign oversight in exchange for access. The shadow of foreign influence grows longer with each passing month, raising uncomfortable questions about Armenia's sovereignty and future. Here is the twist. The true master key to this new corridor is not held in Baku or Yerevan, but by an American-affiliated company quietly installed as both gatekeeper and overseer. This signals a dramatic turn, ushering in an era where United States interests, rather than local voices, determine who may trade and on what terms. The precedent is reminiscent of the 19th century Great Game, when British and Russian agents vied for control of trade routes and buffer states across Central Asia. Meanwhile, Russia's presence in the region is visibly waning. As Moscow's border guards withdraw from Armenia, Western managers move in with remarkable speed. They do not simply facilitate commerce. They set the rules, redraw alliances, and wield control over these routes as a lever for political pressure. For the Caucasus, the contest is no longer just about economic opportunity. It is about independence itself. This deepening reliance on foreign powers increases vulnerability to manipulation and raises the risk of renewed conflict. The so-called road to peace may, in fact, be paving the way for future confrontations. The region's independence hangs by a thread, its fate increasingly shaped by distant actors with competing agendas. These patterns are not unique to the South Caucasus. Similar dynamics are playing out in Moldova and Venezuela. Local crises entangled with global contests for influence, resources, and strategic advantage. The playbook is familiar: hybrid interventions, economic pressure, political co-optation, and the use of infrastructure as both carrot and stick. How can you recognize the grand design behind the headlines? When unrest flares in Moldova, sanctions tighten on Venezuela, or diplomacy suddenly shifts in the Caucasus, each event may appear isolated. But if you look deeper, you will see a single, relentless strategy at work. expanding spheres of influence, weakening rivals, and securing control over key logistical and economic arteries, all while public attention is diverted elsewhere. Listen carefully to the language in the news. Headlines trumpet the defense of democracy, the pursuit of peace, or the promise of prosperity. Yet, beneath these slogans, the real contest is about who controls resources, who moves armies or goods, and which local leaders are co-opted into larger power plays. What is labeled as aid or stabilization may, in reality, be a quiet maneuver, tipping the balance of power thousands of miles away. In this shadowy contest, the true cost is not paid by the architects in Washington, Brussels, or Moscow. Instead, it is ordinary people, families, workers, entire communities, who bear the brunt of choices made far from home. Sometimes, a nation's sovereignty is traded for promises of investment or security. Sometimes, citizens awake to find themselves pawns in a conflict they never chose. How can you spot the pattern before it is too late? Watch for subtle clues: new or upgraded roads and railways, unexpected investments in ports or supply chains, sudden changes in military alliances, a fresh pipeline deal, a new trade corridor, or a shift in bloc voting at the United Nations. All may indicate where the next crisis will spark. These are the fingerprints of global strategy, visible to those who know where to look. Practical steps to avoid being caught off guard include cultivating a habit of critical inquiry. Do not be lulled by slogans or one-sided narratives. Seek out independent reporting, compare multiple perspectives, and always ask, who stands to gain if I accept this version of events? In an age where information is weaponized, these habits are not optional. They are essential for self-defense. Consider the example of the Baltic states in the early 2010s. Faced with growing Russian assertiveness, Estonia, Latvia, and Lithuania invested heavily in media literacy and critical thinking programs. Schools taught students how to scrutinize sources, recognize propaganda, and distinguish between fact and opinion. As a result, these societies proved remarkably resilient to disinformation campaigns, even as tensions in the region escalated. The risk of neglecting these skills is real. Without them, you may be deceived, manipulated, or blindsided by the next global upheaval. Understanding the forces shaping your world is not a privilege. It is an urgent necessity for anyone determined to stay aware and stay safe. But even the most vigilant observer can miss what is hidden in plain sight. The next move may already be unfolding, closer to home than you imagine. For example, recall how the Arab Spring began with a single act of protest in Tunisia, quickly spreading across North Africa and the Middle East, toppling governments and redrawing alliances. Few predicted the speed or scale of the transformation, and many were caught unprepared. The story unfolding across Moldova, Venezuela, and the South Caucasus is still being written. Its conclusion will be shaped by the choices we make as engaged citizens. If there is a single lesson from this whirlwind tour, it is that no crisis exists in a vacuum. Every escalation, every maneuver, reverberates far beyond its own borders. Great powers are quietly weaving these flashpoints into a single, high-stakes contest for resources, influence, and control. For those on the ground in these regions, the risks are painfully real. The threat of being drawn into conflicts scripted half a world away, and of losing hard-won freedoms and fragile stability. Yet for the rest of us, indifference is just as perilous. If we disengage, we surrender the narrative to others, letting distant interests decide what matters and whose voices are heard. History teaches us the dangers of passivity. When citizens in Czechoslovakia failed to resist external pressure in 1938, their country was dismembered at Munich without a shot being fired. When the world ignored the Rwandan genocide in 1994, the price was paid in hundreds of thousands of lives. Choosing passivity is not neutrality, it is relinquishing your agency. Awareness is your best protection. When distant wars and shifting alliances seem abstract, remember, today's interventions and power plays will shape the economy, security, and sovereignty of tomorrow. Ignorance does not shield you. It exposes you to risks you may not see until it is too late. As world powers redraw the map, ask yourself, whose interests are truly at stake? Who benefits, and who pays the price? The more we question, the harder it is for propaganda to take root and for manipulation to go unnoticed. Ultimately, staying critically informed is not only self-defense, but a duty we owe each other. The script remains unwritten, and you have more influence over its ending than you realize. The future will be determined not just by the moves of great powers, but by the vigilance and engagement of ordinary people. Will you watch from the sidelines, or help write the next chapter?